tonight here at the Crossroad Event Series at UNC Chapel Hill. There's Emma Chanlett-Avery from the Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress, Professor Ren from Fudan University in Shanghai, and Mibae of the Atlantic Council, who also is a Japanese diplomat. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you very much for coming. And we discussed really the relationship between the United States, China, Korea, Japan, of course. And let me ask you a couple of questions about this area and the relations between and among these powers. When you look at the world from an Asian perspective, would you say that the United States is being regarded as a declining power, a power on the way out, and that China is really replacing the position the United States has held for so long in the Asia-Pacific region?
I think it's not that absolute, but I do think that particularly in Asia we see some degree of concern about the U.S. staying power in the region, about some of the defense commitments that it's made over the years, and that perhaps the system that has been in place since World War II may be needing some adjustment.
Some adjustment, or is it being radically overhauled and even abolished right now?
I don't see any radical overhaul happening right now. I think there is a difference in approach from this particular U.S. administration. That is not as committed to multilateral organizations, as well as some of the traditional institutions that the U.S. foreign policy has traditionally based itself upon.
Do you think that this is because of this administration, or are there more longer-term trends in American politics, so that even once this administration has lost power, the trend will continue, or will we go back to the situation before? What is your expectation?
I don't see a wholesale shifting back to how we were before. I think it is the case that there are strong powers, particularly China has very much risen and is asserting itself on the world stage. So I don't see us going back to a couple of decades ago. I think that there will be some structural adjustments.
Thank you. Professor Ren.
I don't think that is the case. I know that some people in the United States are worried about the erosion of the dominance of the United States in the world. So they're concerned about the rise of other countries. But in China, people think that being number one can be very difficult, or risky, or hard. That number one has to provide all kinds of public goods. For many people in China, just let the United States be number one. It's quite good. It's why don't we need to overtake the U.S. to become number one? That's one thing. Another thing is that there's still a wide gap. Well, China has achieved economic growth and so on, and China has become closer to the United States in terms of level of development, in terms of income, living standard, and so on. But there's still a wide gap between the two countries. So for China, that's not a problem or a big question.
So China deliberately wants to stay number two, so the United States can't complain?
I don't doubt this sincerity when people talk about this. Being number two, we can be very comfortable being number two.
Okay, thank you very much. What does it look like from the Japanese point of view?
First of all, I do not think that the United States is declining to the extent to be replaced by China. And when I look at the culture, the institutions, the tradition, the history of the United States, this still has a very great potential to continue to be the greatest power in the world. But at the same time, I think that we can no longer take the American tolerance for granted. And the first to be the greatness of America was, from the, at least the perspective of the rest of the world, the greatness of America was, seen through the tolerance of the United States to the extent it tolerates the free riding, or even the allies of the rest of the world. But nowadays, United States seems to declare that we are no longer this much tolerant. And this is not what I say, but some of a friend of my Japanese experts who are looking at American politics recently told me that actually there are some commonalities between the Obama administration and the Trump administration. One is that demanding further burden sharing to the allies, and the other is concentrating on the domestic agendas. For Mr. Obama, it is healthcare, and for Mr. Trump, it is war. And so, although these two presidents are quite different, but we can see some consistency of the United States, so which means that America, at least America cannot continue to be the tolerant, and that's why there are rules that Japan or other U.S. allies should play a role.
Thank you. We are in the era of trade wars, of trade conflict, definitely. This, of course, disconcerting, worrying, but after all, it's not a real war. And there's also potential for real military conflict, at least that is what a number of analysts say, be it in the South China Sea, be it perhaps over Taiwan. How do you see the situation developing regarding serious military conflict, be it a war or be it just military skirmishes, which would be bad enough? Is there such a potential, or are you quite reassured that both powers, both China and the United States, are wise and sensible enough to avoid something like that? Would you like to answer this?
I don't think that the United States or China has an interest, and it's not to their benefit to be engaged in a major military conflict. They're just too big of countries to do that. So I see, continuing distrust and some degree of suspicion on both sides, a continued military build-up with an eye to potential conflict down the road, but I don't see this actually breaking out into a kinetic conflict.
And even accidental military conflicts in the South China Sea, the ramming of ships, the shooting accidentally of ships and sailors, you know what I mean. That you think would not develop into anything serious?
I think and hope that the United States and Chinese military have developed enough channels of communication that something would not escalate.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the Taiwan issue?
I mean, Taiwan has obviously been a concern, particularly of Congress actually, through the passage of the Taiwan Relations Act for some time. And I think that is where there's sort of the most danger of a degree of tension between the naval forces of the United States and China. But again, I think that a lot of hotlines and channels of communication have been opened in order to avoid getting into a more widespread conflict.
Thank you.
No country wants an armed conflict. Neither U.S. nor China wants a military conflict between them. One important positive development was that during President Obama's visit to China in 2014, I believe, the two sides reached an agreement for measures to avoid sea and air incidents between the two countries and two militaries, which I think is quite important and positive. During the recent meeting between U.S. Secretary of Defense and China's Minister of Defense, the two countries reached and discussed one recent episode in South China Sea, which was that the U.S. and Chinese warships were very close together. So the two military leaders discussed, had reached a consensus that they should avoid any conflict in South China and should continue the efforts to avoid an incident at the sea.
Thank you. And what about Taiwan? Is that a serious hotspot where military conflict could break out?
Yeah, that's true. It is a flashpoint. It could become something dangerous for U.S., China, and for the region. And the issue is how United States and China should do to manage the issue well. The good news is that the recent Taiwan local elections is probably a signal from the Taiwanese people for a stable cross-Taiwan Strait relationship. And I think it's a positive development.
Thank you.
Taiwan.
Yeah.
Taiwan issue is based on the very sensitive balance of all major players, including China, Taiwan, even the United States. So, from the Chinese perspective, it is always Taiwan side to try to change the status quo, and China try to, intervene or push back. Any attempt, a seeming attempt by the particular current Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan. But this again could create, any new chemical reaction over the situation. So this is dangerous. But what means dangerous is that all major players, particularly the Taiwan side and the Chinese side, think that they are the side try to keep the status quo, but the counterpart is not challenging with that. Why we have the legitimacy to push it back, and this sort of an accumulation of the perceptions could lead to a situation everybody did not expect and want.
Thank you. Let me ask you one final question. Is China worried, even if it appears a little unrealistically to us, but is China worried that North Korea might move too close to the United States and become a friend, ally, partner of the United States rather than the opposite as it was until very, very recently? So is there some serious concern that in China that North Korea is going to move too close onto the side of the United States?
I don't think that that's a realistic concern, and I doubt that Beijing is actually that concerned about it.
At least I'm not worried about that. North Korea is right on China's borders. It almost cannot survive without the provisions from China. So I'm not worried about that. China has been encouraging them, trying very hard to persuade them to open up their society and take a new path. But they always have this security concern and worry, because they believe that they have hostile to the United States, imposing a biggest security threat to them. So this has to be eliminated for them. And with the denuclearization process. We hope they will take a new path.
And will we soon see a denuclearized North Korea?
Not anytime soon, I'm afraid. It will take a fairly long process.
People in the West, or many, would argue that the lack of serious pressure by China on North Korea is preventing that result.
Well, it's not true. It's unfair. It has to be a joint effort of all of us. China only cannot achieve a denuclearized Korean Peninsula.
How do you see that? You're a Korea expert. Is the lack of pressure by China on North Korea responsible for, let's say, the delayed denuclearization of the country?
I think the denuclearization negotiations right now are mostly centered between the United States and North Korea. China has stated repeatedly that its goal is also a denuclearized Korean Peninsula, and certainly China has a lot of leverage to offer here. But I think that there's a recognition that the United States also has a role in terms of providing security guarantees and perhaps signing some sort of peace declaration that would lead North Korea to take the necessary steps to
But have sanctions been diluted on the part of China so that North Korea doesn't feel as much pressure as it felt even a few months ago, or is that wrong?
There's just not enough data to say that for sure. My sense is that maximum pressure can't be maintained when you're trying to negotiate with the country, so that even at the margins, all the countries that we were pressing really severely to enforce and implement these sanctions probably are not being as scrupulous that they have been before. But it's very difficult to get reliable data, particularly in real time over the last couple months, as to whether China specifically and perhaps Russia is relaxing some of those sanctions.
Thank you very much. How do you see the North Korean problem developing?
In general?
In general and regarding what I asked before.
So the current focus is at how the US DPR negotiation will develop. And the current impasse we are seeing is that North Korea is demanding in order for them to move further forward. In addition to what they have already done, they need to something given from the United States, and like a list of sanctions or the end of the war declarations and anything else. So if both the US side and DPR are very much serious to come up with a certain tangible outcome in the near future, sooner or later, we will see the start of the very serious negotiation over sort of a matchmaking between what North Korea does and what the United States or other its partners are doing. But to see the environment mature to that extent, we still need to see a certain level of exchanges in the months to come.
Thank you very much indeed. Now if you start more than 5 or 10 minutes, but thank you very much. We could go on for much longer because these topics are so interesting. But thank you very much, Mibae, Professor Ren, Emma Chanlett-Avery. Thank you for coming to UNC Chapel Hill and to the Krasno event series, and please come back again sometime. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.